Hello everyone. Welcome to the solution of LeetCode problem 1822 named sign of the product of an array. In this problem, we are given an integer array and we have to product all the value presented in the array and we have to determine the sign of the product. If the sign of the product is positive, we have to return 1. If sign of the product is negative, we have to return -1. Otherwise, we have to return 0. Now let's understand the first example. Here, the array contains 7 elements, which is -1, -2, -3, -4, 3, 2, and 1. And if we product all of the values, the value will become 144, which is definitely positive. So in this case, we have to return 1. In the second example, the array contains 5 elements, which is 1, 5, 0, 2, and -3. And the product of all the value of this array is 0. So we have to return 0. In the third example, the array contains 5 elements, which is -1, 1, -1, 1, and -1. And the product of all the values in this array is -1. So in this case, we have to return -1 because the product is a negative number. I hope you understood the problem. Now let's understand the constraint. Here, the array length can be in between 1 to 1000 and each of the array element can be in between -100 to +100. I hope you understood the constraint. Now let's move on to the solution. Now let's understand the algorithm of this problem. In this problem, we have given some values and we have to perform the product operation among them. And finally, we have to determine the sign of the producted value. That means if our product value is positive, so we have to return 1. If our product value is negative, we have to return -1. Otherwise, we have to return 0. Now, the algorithm is pretty simple. For the array, we have to simply determine the number of positive element and the number of negative element and the number of 0 appeared in this array. Suppose in the array, the number of negative element is odd. Suppose here, we have -1 here 1 times, 2 times, and 3 times. So in this case, -1 appeared 3 times. So the number of negative value in this array is odd. And if we product the odd number of negative value, the final answer will definitely become negative. This is the first intuition. The second intuition is, if we perform the product operation among even number of negative numbers, the result will be positive. Because if we perform the product operation between -1 and -1, the result will be +1. So this is the second intuition. Now, the third intuition is, if in our array there is at least 1 0 present, the answer of the product value is 0. Suppose the sixth element of this array is 0, and if we perform the product operation among all of the array element, the result will be 0. So in this case, we have to return 0. I hope you understood the intuition of negative numbers and 0. Now, the final intuition is, after checking these both two conditions, we have to check whether our current array has some positive element. If it has some of the positive element, then the product value will become positive. Because if we perform the multiplication operation among a lot of the positive numbers, the result will also become positive. So finally, we can summarize that if in our given array, the number of negative element presented is odd, then we have to return -1, and the number of negative element presented in this array is even, we have to return +1. And in our array, if there is at least 1 0 present, we have to return 0, because no matter what, if in our array contains at least 1 0, then the product of all of the array values can become 0. And finally, if our current array element contains a lot of positive numbers, then we have to return +1. I hope you understood the algorithm. Now let's move on to the code. In this algorithm, the code is pretty simple. At first, we are given a function named arraySign. The parameter of this function is a vector, which is the input vector. Now we have to take one variable to count how many negative number presented in the array, and one Boolean variable to determine whether there is at least 1 0 presented in our array or not. Now we will perform a loop which iterates every element of this array, and if any of the element is 0, we have to assign true value to the 0 variable. Otherwise, if any element is negative, then we have to increment our negative counter. And finally, if the value of 0 is positive, that means our current array contains at least 1 0. In this case, we have to return 0. And according to the intuition, if our current number of negative element is odd, we have to return -1. Otherwise, we have to simply return 1. I hope you understood the code. Now let's move on to the time and space complexity of this program. In this program, the time complexity is big O of n, because to determine whether there is at least 1 0 element or there is any negative number, we have to iterate all the element in the array. So the time complexity is big O of n. And we are using two variables in our code to store the negative counter and the Boolean value. So in this case, we are using constant memory. So the space complexity is big O of 1. I hope you understood the time and space complexity of this program. Thank you everyone for watching this video. We will get back soon with another LeetCode solution.